Materials supplied by Microsoft Corporation may be used for internal review, analysis, or research only. Any editing, reproduction, publication, rebroadcast, public showing, internet, or public display is forbidden and may violate copyright law.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to what's now the 37th of these symposia. So it's been a while that we've been doing this. We have the usual format. So we have two talks, one from the UW side, one from the Microsoft side. And just a little bit of logistics. Drinks and coffee are right out there. Restrooms are this way. If you parked on a visitor parking spot, you should register your car with a receptionist. And I also want to point out there's a whole bunch of lunch boxes in the corner there. So the caveat there is they're not ours. They are free for the taking, but they have been out since lunch. So at your own risk, but the cheese and other stuff is up to date. And yeah, we're going to start with Ryan, and Faye is going to introduce Ryan, and then we're going to move on to the second talk, and I'll introduce Emre at that point.
So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ryan Georgi. He's graduated from UC Berkeley for his bachelor degree, and then he joined UW first as a CLMS student, and then he continued into the PhD program. So he worked with me and Bill. So today he's going to present part of his dissertation work.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to be talking about automatically. Is it on? Yeah. So I'm going to be talking about automatically enriching interlinear gloss text. And before I get to all of what that means, this work is kind of in cooperation with two other projects at the university, the Ripley's and aggregation projects. So here are team members for those two projects and the links if you're interested. And we're supported by an NSF grant. So before we get into what IGT is and what it's used for, just some background information. In our field, we've been developing a lot of new technologies and expanding language coverage beyond just English and Arabic and French. But building these new tools often comes with data requirements. So that's annotated data, unannotated data in large amounts for unsupervised methods, or both for semi-supervised hybrid systems. And acquiring this data is neither cheap nor quick. There are some particularly interesting and high coverage projects out there. So the Krubadan project is a project focusing on low resource languages. It's got 2,124 languages. And the Indigenous Tweet database by the same author has 179 languages of indigenous languages from around the world on Twitter. So that's a very impressive amount of data, even for unannotated sources, because these languages are ones that aren't typically seen very often. That being said, we know of at least through Ethnologue 7,000 plus languages known to be currently spoken. So that leaves, even with those impressive coverage results, quite a lot of leeway. So most of these languages are low resource. They're not always large speaker populations or strategically important to Western countries that are funding a lot of this. Some of them have as few as 80 speakers. So spending a lot of time and effort developing electronic resources might not be very viable. But still having these resources could help answer some large-scale typological questions about humans and our languages. So I'm going to take a look at how we can approach some of these 7,000 languages programmatically with some pretty interesting resources. So one common way of getting leveraging a resource-rich language to create resources for resource-poor ones is via projection, where you take annotation on one language, align it with another, and project the results, map them one-to-one. The first problem that presents is, how do you achieve high-quality word alignment? Then how do you deal with unaligned words? And finally, how do you deal if the two languages diverge from one another in how they represent meaning, even if your alignment says that these words are roughly equivalent? So I'm going to take a look at ways to address all of these. So what is interlinear gloss text? For a lot of linguists, it's going to be a pretty common sight. It's typically used to give examples in linguistic papers. So this is an excerpt from a dissertation on non-macro role core arguments. I don't know what that is, but the German example here is nice and clean. So just to take a look at that a little bit more closely, IGT instances typically have a few interesting properties. They have 3 lines, so the language, the gloss, and the translation. The language line is going to be whatever the native language is. The gloss is this interesting hybrid English and morphosyntactic annotation. And then the translation is typically a natural sentence in typically English. So one thing we notice is that the words on the gloss line and the translation line are often mirrored. So we have Peter, we have children. They're not always in the same place because the language we're annotating might actually present it in a different order. But if we look at the way the words occur in each line, we can infer word alignment. Then we can subsequently use this alignment to project annotation. So if we part a speech tag, the translation line, we can use that inferred alignment. Then since the gloss happens to match up one-to-one with the language that it's annotating, we can just follow the alignment and assign those part of speech tags to the language there without having any annotation directly on the language to begin with. Additionally, I talked about the morphosyntactic information there. Here it's presented in the form of grams. In this case, they're case marking or, well, case annotation, since the morphology is a little embedded and complex there. But that's an interesting little bit of annotation that IGT provides as well. So using IGT, we have a really fascinating resource that Will and Faye have been working on called the Online Database of Interlinear Text, or ODIN. It consists currently of 3,000 PDF documents that have been automatically crawled from the web, 200,000 IGT instances, and that covers 1,400 languages. And right now we're actually in the process of expanding ODIN. We have 1.3 million new documents. Those were retrieved with a high recall, low precision method. So not all of them necessarily have IGT in it, but even if we're talking about 5% of those being valid IGT instances, we're talking at least one order of magnitude in the number of instances, and who knows how many languages that'll add to the database. So actually using IGT, let's start with word alignment. Talked a little bit about how we can do that following the repeated words. And so ODIN has high coverage by virtue of having all those languages, but each language doesn't have necessarily that many instances. So most languages in ODIN have fewer than 100 instances in the given language. That's not really enough for typical statistical alignment methods. If you just try doing alignment on 100 sentences or so that we have there, we found that in our results that it was about F-score of about 0.56. So I'm going to instead kind of look at leveraging the gloss line like I described earlier. So I have 3 IGT instances here. The first is Oriya, language spoken in southern and eastern India. Got Turkish, which is of course spoken in Turkey and other parts of Europe and Central Asia. And Yukagir, or Yukagur, which is an endangered language of Eastern Russia, and this only has about 70 to 80 living speakers. So you'll notice that we have the gram here for third person singular. in ORIA. It's unclear whether that's some kind of clitic or maybe just a pronoun, some kind of agreement marker. In the other languages, it looks a little bit more clear that it's some kind of inflection and agreement on the verb. In any case, we're seeing that same token throughout these very disparate languages. And in addition to the grams, we have all these English words scattered throughout all of the Odin database on all of these different languages. So while 100 parallel sentences might not seem like much for a particular language, 200,000 instances that share this kind of pseudo-language of English words and grams that we see in repetition throughout the different languages, that's something you can get some traction on. So if we use the data for all the languages in Odin, that can actually benefit the alignment for each language, since we don't actually need to use the Odin instances for the language we're looking at in order to have a database or have parallel sentences between this gloss line pseudo-language and a translation line. So just to compare some of our results from different alignment methods, the first method is just statistical alignment. If you just run Giza++ on the English and the foreign language for each one of these languages and the IGT instances in the Odin database, the results are pretty, as you might expect, pretty bad, between 0.5 and 0.6. If you do take all of the gloss lines and all of the translation lines from the Odin database and throw those in, you get quite a big improvement, as you might expect from having so much more data. The third method, the statistical plus heuristic there, that is the case where you take the heuristic method, which is where I was talking about the translation line and gloss line having those string matches. If you take all the words that match and throw them into the liner as their own parallel sentences, you get a little bit of a boost, but not much. And then the heuristic method actually works really well. The reason is the recall is roughly kind of a wash for most of the methods, but it's just heuristic is so much more precise given that it really zeroes in on those shared words between the languages or between the gloss and translation. So using the word alignment there, that's really handy, but we'd like to get some more information like part-of-speech tags for these languages. Even when we have that high-quality word alignment, the projection might still be problematic. So this is actually a case where even with our heuristic method, we don't get a whole lot of traction. This is from Chintang, which is an endangered language spoken in Tibet. And it just so happens the Bickel et al. Folks there have a wonderful team where they've gathered thousands of instances of IGT for Chintang, so it's a really great resource we took a look at. The problem with this instance here, you might see, is that despite the gloss being very helpful and felicitous transliteration of the Chintang data, it really has no overlap whatsoever with the translation. So to try to do our heuristic approach simply won't work. And that's a problem if we're trying to project annotation. So if we use projection alone, we found that our part-of-speech accuracy was only 12%. And that's because the vast majority of the tokens were simply unaligned and we had no ability to recover a part-of-speech tag. So that's not as bad for all IGT instances, but there's still room for improvement. Just to see the results in a couple other languages, it ranges from just 1% in French to 25% in Bulgarian. These were just some small instances we used for evaluation. But if we work directly on the gloss line, using some of the information provided there and bypass the alignment problems entirely, that can boost our accuracy quite a bit. So to give some information how we can kind of ignore the alignment altogether, we got two more instances here. This is GUI. I have no idea how to pronounce that either, but it's an endangered language of Botswana that has about 2,000 to 4,000 speakers. And then an instance from Yaqui, that's a Uro-Aztecan language. There are about 16,000 speakers in the Sonoran Desert, ranging from Mexico to Arizona. And again, we see that the 1SG gram, the first person singular, is present in all these cases, but it's not always the same meaning. So in the first instances, it's inflection on a pronoun. In Yaqui, it seems to be inflection on a verb. And if you're really eagle-eyed, you'll actually notice that in the GUI example, we actually see the nominative and imperative there. So there's actually inflection on the pronoun that determines the mood of the clause, which is just a fascinating little aside there. But the takeaway is that the gram is a really helpful indicator of what the part-of-speech tag might be, but it doesn't map one-to-one. If you see first-person singular, you don't know for certain what type of, what the word class is. So instead, if we use those as features on a classifier, we can train it by starting off with labeling a small set of instances with their part-of-speech tag. And we're going to use that as the target label for a classifier. So we start with a couple features. First is maybe the most common tag for English words in the gloss. So we have the a place, precipice, do with. And we just add those as features for the label. Also the non-English tokens, the grams, we can just use those as is, as binary features, their presence or absence. And then take all those together and use those to train a classifier. Now, when we run the classifier directly on the gloss line versus projecting from the translation to the gloss line, we get a huge boost in accuracy for part-of-speech tagging. Largely, that's due to the fact that we don't have to worry about unaligned tokens anymore. We can actually just take a guess at the word with our classifier and its features that it fires. So the next step is, if we have a classifier that we trained with some manually labeled instances, that is great. That's a couple hours work, got some good results. But what if we use more of the Odin data? So projection isn't particularly great. It's got lots of gaps, as we discussed, but it is really precise. So if we project part-of-speech tags over the 200,000 Odin instances and compare that to just the manual labeling on 143 instances, what would that look like? Furthermore, if we transfer the gloss line part-of-speech tags to the language line and use that to train a monolingual classifier or monolingual tagger, how does that compare? So some results for this, and just to step through them. The first thing of note here is that this system here, the manually trained classifier, was based on gloss lines that have been annotated for some languages. For Indonesian and Swedish, there was actually no Indonesian or Swedish instances used at all. So this is a result that is using no data other than the IGT instances for these languages. The Odin based classifier here, these are all results using the projected part-of-speech tags to train the classifier. And it actually performs better than the manual classifier, and there's no language-specific information from a human intervention whatsoever involved in the system, which is. And then finally, a supervised system is always going to outperform these. These aren't the most stellar results, going to get somewhere above 90%. But if you actually, even using a supervised system that uses about 1,000 sentences, which is more roughly in keeping with the amount of IGT data that's going to be available, the difference isn't quite so striking between the systems here and a supervised system. And most importantly, all of these systems here, the Odin-based systems, can be trained for any language in the database and require no manual intervention, whereas the supervised systems actually need to have someone sit down and create that annotated data. So finally, we also did some experiments on parsing. We did some dependency parsing and phrase structure parsing. We can project those structures just as we did with the part-of-speech tags and some clever tree manipulation. And the part-of-speech tagging that we performed earlier can actually help with those parsers when we have some part-of-speech tag data. A lot of the dependency parsing that's done in this area is typically unsupervised, and if you assume that you don't have part-of-speech tags, it makes the whole process much, much harder. So one other thing that we did with the parsing, in Georgi et al. 2014, we actually used dependency trees. We used languages that we had some dependency trees for, and just a few. Going over those dependency trees and our projections, we actually learned how those trees diverged. So the projections would come up with one answer based strongly on the English interpretation and the English parse. Then comparing those to the trees that we had for the other language, we could actually see some common patterns. Then if we actually applied corrections to those to account for those divergent patterns, we could improve the accuracy from 55% to 75%. So just an example of some patterns. Sometimes we'd see multiple alignments in a language, and knowing the general attachment headedness for the language would be helpful. If we knew that it was left attaching or right attaching from the trees, we could figure out a solution for which word in the multiple alignment would take precedence. The other case was with swapped words. We found that, in particular in the Hindi trees, Hindi is a postpositional language, and so we would often see the English prepositions being given the head of the dependency parse. And we found in the Hindi tree that we'd actually want those switched. So just a few instances was able to get us to learn the divergence pattern. So finally, what can we do with all this? So projecting the part-of-speech tags that we arrive at can be used for some interesting typological questions. So basic word order, the morpheme order, and whether or not we have definite or indefinite determiners. And Bender et al., Emily's group, looked at determining case type using the gloss line and the part-of-speech tags on there. So whether a language was ergative absolutive or nominative accusative, that's a question that you can answer by trying to figure out the case markings on the gloss line. So finally, projection is a common solution. Just to wrap up, we looked at how we addressed getting the word alignments using the gloss line and the various heuristics and methods we could use to improve alignment there. Then as for the unaligned words, just skipping over those entirely and focusing on the gloss line to train a classifier can kind of obviate that problem entirely. And then for language divergence, both using the classifier to look at the gloss line itself and not assuming that it's going to have the same part-of-speech tag as the English translation, but also learning those divergence patterns from the comparison between the trees. So finally, the actual intent package itself is at the core of all this, and that stands for the Interlinear Text Enrichment Toolkit. So that's the software that's been used to automatically enrich do this enrichment, and it projects the dependency and phrase structures. And currently, we're about to release the 2.1 version of the Odin database with not yet with the expanded coverage, but with the current 1,400 languages. And in addition, Intent's going to be used to do the part-of-speech tagging, dependency structure and phrase structure projection, and word alignment, and provide those enriched files in the 2.1 release. And it's going to be using this Zeit formalism, which is a XML version, or an XML serialization of IGT data that makes it very nice and easy to add annotation tiers to IGT instances, as well as alternative tiers. And so there is a basic web interface, too, for intent that you can play with to create your own IGT instances and see how they work. And just to show a quick example of that. So this is just a quick little example of an Chinese. I'm told that this is a nice ambiguous sentence in Chinese between Zhang Han does not like anyone and no one likes Zhang Han. So if you go ahead and run this through intent, it'll create the Zeit file for you. It's a little intimidating looking, but we're working on a tool to process that and make it easier for human annotators. And then this just gives you the Zeit output. Then running it through the enrichment, you can also see we get the part-of-speech tags back. And I think in this case it was actually Zhang Han, who, whom, all, not like. So noun, who, whom, pronoun, all, debatably a determiner, not adverbial. And then like is, we realized that the like is probably seen more often as a metaphorical adposition than it is with warm and fuzzies, given that our database is largely going to be trained on Wall Street Journal type stuff. You can play around with this. The results aren't always going to be the highest quality, but we can use this for any language in Odin, and so we're going to be working on that in the coming months. So I think that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
So have you considered typological constraints in these projections? Like the thing that jumps out to me of the example you just gave is that there's no verb in that sentence. So like there should be a verb.
In the Chinese here?
In the Chinese sentence.
Okay.
So could you use that typological constraint as a way to do better part-of-speech projections, to disambiguate between like and like?
So using the typological constraint, you mean feeding in the information that that's not, for Chinese, that's not expressed as a verb, you mean? Or?
No, I think it's the expectation that it's a sentence we hope to see a verb.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So there is.
Oh, yeah, I gotcha.
Actually, but in this case,
Yeah.
that is a verb.
Yeah, no, and actually that's a good question. One of the problems with IGT is that it's not always full sentences. So a lot of part of the reason that this is as kind of messy seeming as it is, and I didn't get into it too much, is that the Odin database is from PDF documents, and this nice, neat XML format that we have is something that we developed to store it in, but the PDF documents themselves, we actually have to extract it from using PDF to text conversion, and so there gets all sorts of interesting corruptions from the PDF to text conversion. But then on top of that, IGT is also occasionally sentence fragments or sometimes just single words. So it's not always easy to treat it as a standalone sentence, although that's a good idea that maybe defaulting to that would be a good thing to try, because probably most of the instances are going to be whole sentences. Yeah.
Thinking further about this error, because it's interesting. In this case, you've done the part-of-speech tagging just on the last line. Is that true?
Yeah.
But you have a really nice alignment, and presumably if you look at the source language gloss, the part of speech tagger, sorry, the tags for the, not source language, but the translation line did not treat that like as an add position.
Yeah, actually, I think we looked at this the other day, and it was, if I can see it here, because I think it was the case that the English language tagger, okay, so this is it here.
We're still seeing your slide.
We're not seeing it.
So you have to s-
We're not seeing it.
Oh. Okay, maybe it actually did
so
non-likes.
translation word, yeah?
Oh, does. So it got does not like, yeah.
Okay, so they
Because,
were there.
and this is where we realized that, oh wait, where was our part of speech tagger for English trained? Penn Tree Bank, which is Wall Street Journal. So again, they're probably not talking about like, you know, McDonald's warm fuzzies for Burger King. They're probably talking about some, you know, metaphorical comparison. But
So in general, could you combine the gloss-based part of speech tags with projected ones in the case that you have alignments from the sort of the heuristic alignment method?
so like a back off, like start
Back
with,
off or some way of combining those sources of information.
Yeah, so there are actually two things that I didn't talk about directly in here that I've tried, and I didn't put them because the results ended up not being very promising. But the first is using projection and then filling in the unaligned tokens with various methods, one being just, let's just call everything a noun and see how that does. The other was actually running the classifier on those unprojected tokens. That was one way of combining them. The other way was actually using the classifier and then feeding into it as a feature what the part of speech tag that was assigned to the word aligned with it, if it exists, is. And so that actually that tended to hurt more than it helped, interestingly. I think the feature of just, if you have an English word, what's its most common tag is so strongly predictive that it actually didn't help above that. That being said, the supervision that the evaluation corpus that we have for this is still pretty small. So a lot of the results and the conclusions we're drawing are still kind of preliminary. So, yeah.
Given that there's a large number of pairs of languages, could you explain how the heuristics work for the alignment?
So the heuristics that we work with, and I think part of your question is said there's a huge number of pairs of languages, right? Yeah. So I think in our database there are some instances where the gloss and translation are German or non-English, but the vast majority, it's so overwhelmingly English that we just assume that the one of the pair is English. But that being said, what the heuristics entail is typically we'll break apart the morphemes, compare those individually. We'll do some stemming, just to see if there's running and ran or some alternate versions of the word. Also compare the gram if we have like a 3SG. Just see standing all by itself. We'll see if there's a he or she or it floating around in the English. They're pretty simple things, but kind of putting them all together, we get a pretty good alignment. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could also get a lot of insights from the types of errors that are being made, or cases where the classifier, for example, has low confidence, right? Because that would indicate that you're dealing with a phenomenon that's either like rarely observed, or that might be worth more human investigation.
That's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't looked at that. And actually in finding instances to kind of talk about that case with the imperative inflection on a pronoun actually brought to mind, like, I really wonder what the classifier thinks of this, because that's a really bizarre thing to see on here. I have a suspicion that things like imperative or perfect or anything like that is going to be so strongly weighted for verb that it might label it as that. But yeah, it would be interesting to see the confidence scores on that, to see like, okay, what's happening here. Yeah.
So the second talk is by Emery Kitcheman and Matt Richardson. Emery is going to present this. This is work that partially was presented at WWW this year, right?
Oh, no, it's in submission to WWW.
Oh, it's in submission. Oh, I thought
and was presented at KDD.
KDD, okay.
Or, yeah.
So there's also, I mean, there's a part here that has been presented, but there's also a part that is entirely new. And to introduce Emery, I mean, I had the good fortune to be able to work with Emery on a number of projects involving social media, and that's an area that he's very interested in. And the talk today is to how to actually discover outcomes from social media, from the language that you find there.
Great. Thanks very much, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Emre Kıcıman, and I wanted to talk to you today about some work that we've been doing here. Like Michael said, with Matt Richardson, we started this project a while ago, and we had a paper out about some of the techniques that I'll mention today at KDD over the summer. And the rest of the work is in submission at WWW right now, and we did that work over the summer with Alexandra Olteanu from EPFL and Onur Varol from Indiana University while they were interning here at MSR over the summer. So what this project is about, why do we care about what happens? You know, every day we all decide something. We all decide to take some action. We're in some situation, maybe we want to get out of it, maybe we just want to know what's going to happen. And so we start off by saying, okay, you know, I'm going to pick the thing to do next that you know, is going to be best for me, whatever my goal is, whatever I personally want. And this works for some people. Some people say, okay, should I do this? They think it through. They have good kind of knowledge about the world around them and about the future, and then you know, they pick the right thing to do. Turns out great. Not all of us, though, do so well. Some of us, you know, occasionally can't actually predict what's going to happen. We don't really understand the situation very well, and we take an action that goes off in the wrong direction and doesn't work out for us. So what this project is about saying, well, you know, we actually have a lot of opportunity to learn about what happens in people's lives, about what happens after people take actions or what happens after people find themselves in certain situations. There's hundreds of millions of people who are regularly and publicly posting about their personal experiences, often to the chagrin of the people who follow them and listen to them on Facebook and Twitter. But there is an incredible amount of detail there. And so the question is, can we aggregate this and can we learn about what happens in different situations and bring that back in to help people make better decisions in their own lives? So our broad goal is to build a system that can analyze really the humongous amount of information here and let us answer open domain questions about the outcomes of actions and situations. Now, like I mentioned, we did some of this work before with Matt Richardson, and a lot of that work focused on how to go from the social media messages to timelines of events that we would then analyze. This presentation is going to be more about how to apply propensity score matching analysis to analyze those timelines that are based on social media posts, and then evaluate the performance of that analysis across a wide variety of domains. So let me go into kind of the process that we're doing. First, we start off with a number of social media messages, and then we're going to extract out some representation of what's happening in people's lives based on these texts. And given some action that we care about, we are going to separate these timelines into two groups. What we'll call a treatment group, that we believe actually where people experienced the action or the situation that's of interest to us, and a control group where people did not experience the situation. Once we have these two groups of users, and their timelines. We're going to learn a propensity score estimator. So we're going to figure out, basically, we're going to learn a function that estimates the probability of someone having this treatment, given everything that happened before in their lives. And then we are going to stratify the users based on this likelihood. Now, I'll go into a little bit more detail about what happens when we stratify these users and why we do it. But then once we have this, we'll go ahead and calculate for every outcome that we see happening after this event. We're going to go ahead and iterate, and we're going to calculate the difference basically between what's the likelihood of someone experiencing this event given that they had the treatment versus the likelihood that people experience this event given that they didn't have the treatment. We're going to calculate that for each strata that we see and then sum that up for the population. Like I said, so how do we build out these individual timelines? For the things that we're talking about here, the experiments I'm going to talk to you about here, we used English language Twitter data from the Firehose, aggregated by user ID. We cleaned these tweets to remove URLs, @mention, stop words, and we applied basic stemming and normalization of common slangs. So for example, repeated letters. Then we extracted all unigrams and bigrams that people were mentioning as events in someone's life, and we placed them on a timeline according to the metadata of the tweet. We identified treatments basically by finding users who mention a target token at any point in their timeline, and the control is the users in our data set who don't mention that target token. And in the work at KDD, we actually describe a set of much more sophisticated techniques. We wanted to focus here on the propensity score analysis, so we basically tried to remove as much computational overhead as possible for our experiments. But in our KDU paper, we found that there's a number of things that were important. We applied experiential tweet classification, so we only considered tweets where people seemed to be talking about something they experienced personally. Rather than just taking unigrams and bigrams, we applied phrase segmentation to take out, find kind of cohesive phrases where the people were using. And then we clustered these phrases, and then we also applied temporal expression resolution. So if someone's talking about, last year or last week I did something, we would shift the events along the timeline appropriately. Now, talking about the propensity score analysis, I want to do in one slide just a quick kind of introduction to propensity score analysis. How many people here are familiar with counterfactual analysis and propensity score analysis? Okay, so I was hoping I could ask someone more questions after the talk, but that's fine. Okay, so we want to measure the outcomes of some treatment versus no treatment, right? So this is like a classical social sciences science experiment thing, right? We have a randomized trial or something, and you want to figure out what happens. But we don't have a randomized trial. Okay, so what we can do is we can do a thought experiment. So ideally, we have an individual who had some effect, so had some treatment. So we're going to say this individual I got some treatment 1, and then we have the outcome, which is this function y sub I of 1. And we'd like to see, for this individual, what would have happened if they hadn't taken the treatment. So ideally, say, if Michael, took some action, we'd like to take Michael and observe him in some parallel universe where he's exactly the same, except he didn't take this action. And then we'd look at basically the differences in outcomes, and that would be the actual effect of this action. But we can't measure Michael in two parallel universes. He either takes the action or he doesn't take the action. We only get to observe one of these cases. So instead what we can do is we would find, say, Michael taking the action, and we would take someone who's very similar to him who doesn't take the action, and we would basically compare the outcomes here. And if Michael has a twin who's exactly the same as him, then we can estimate what would have been the effect of this action by comparing Michael to his twin who didn't take the action. Now, of course, finding someone who's a twin in every important way is really difficult because, in kind of technically, I guess you would say we're described by very high dimensional vectors, and the curse of dimensionality means that there was no one who is really very close to you, to any given individual. So instead, we back off a little bit further, and we take a look at population level effects. So we're going to say, we're going to estimate what the outcomes are after after a whole population of people take this action, and we're going to compare that to the estimate of outcomes, the expected value of outcomes for people who don't take the action. And as long as these populations are comparable, i.e. they're statistically identical, then this gives you a good expectation on the actual outcomes of this action being 1 or 0. Now, how do you get these comparable populations? Randomized trials is one way. When you're working with observational studies, a different way is to then apply something like a stratified propensity score analysis. And what this does is essentially it splits the original population that you're looking at into multiple comparable subpopulations. And each of these subpopulations now, because you're stratifying on a function that's taking into account all of their features, basically it ends up balancing the features that were relevant for this action. In our case, the features of a user that we're going to be balancing on are going to be all of their past events, which is the unigrams and bigrams of all their messages that they've mentioned in the past. And just as it's worth noting that our control users don't actually have a past or future. They never had a treatment event, so we can't tell when we're going to align them on. So we just pick a random time at which to align them. And so we pick a random time, and then their past events we're going to define as being everything that happened before this random time. So that is, of all the possible times when they didn't take this action, we just pick one. Now our task to learn a propensity score estimator is to learn the likelihood that the user mentions this treatment token. So we basically learn a function. What is the probability that the next word is going to be this target token that we care about? That they're going to be in the treatment or control class given the past events. And in our case, we're training our estimator with an average perceptron learning algorithm, and we're training this algorithm based on all of the timelines that we've extracted. Now we use this then to bin people, and we can then, this quickly takes a look at whether the propensity score estimator function is doing a good job. There's two things that we care about. One is that the populations are actually matched. The control and treatment populations within a strata should have similar distributions of features. The other thing that we'd like to see is that the propensity score is actually estimating things correctly, and this function shows that. Okay, and then how do we measure the outcome? In these experiments, what we're treating outcomes, all of the words that people say after they take the treatment or don't take the treatment, as binary values. So this is, did they ever in the future use the word, Y? And either then mention that word or they don't. And we're going to then measure the average treatment effect summed across all the strata as the increase in likelihood of them mentioning some event given that they took the treatment versus that they didn't take the treatment. Now propensity score analysis is borrowed from the causal inference literature, but if we actually wanted to make causal claims, we'd require a fair amount more domain knowledge. And the reason is that there's two, there's a fair number of assumptions being made here, but there's two in particular that the propensity score analysis makes that we don't, and generally causal inference in general makes. First is that we would have to assume that all the important confounding variables are included in our analysis. And even though people talk about a lot of things on social media, there's no guarantee that they talk about everything that's important, or that everyone talks about everything that's important. And so we don't meet that assumption. And then there's also this fun assumption that the outcomes of one particular that happen to one individual should be independent of whether other people take a treatment. And in a network environment, that's generally not the case. What happens to you depends on what other people are doing as well. So because of this, we don't say that we're actually pulling out causal relationships between outcomes and these treatments, but we do find, having said that, we do find that this analysis gives much better results than simple correlations. So that's kind of fun. So to evaluate these techniques and see whether or not they did well, we picked 39 specific situations, and these situations were chosen from 9 high-level topics. We chose these 9 domains for diversity. They include, within the business topic, we looked at construction and maintenance, people mentioning financial service-related stuff or investing. In health, we looked at several mental issues, diseases, and drugs, essentially. And within the category of societal topics, we looked at general societal issues, law, and then relationships. This category is taken from the Open Directory project. So it's an existing taxonomy that we borrowed. And then within each of these high-level topics, we chose several specific situations that we basically picked at random from searches that people are doing to Bing already. So we wanted some grounding that we were looking at questions that people cared about. And so that's why we borrowed these from Bing. The actual data we analyzed was 3 months of Firehose data. And so what we did was we looked at March 2014. We looked at everyone who expressed taking these actions, so that they mentioned they had high blood pressure or high cholesterol, or they mentioned they were taking lorazepam or Xanax, trying to lose belly fat, getting divorced, finding true love, or cleaning countertops. And then, given that they mentioned this in March 2014, we grabbed all of their tweets from the prior month, February 2014, and all of their tweets from the month after, in April 2014. Then what we do is we run our analysis. We extract the outcomes that occur after people take these, experience these situations, and then we also look at the temporal evolution of how when these outcomes occur after people take the treatment. We also got judgments on how good our results were from Mechanical Turk, and then we also compared to existing knowledge bases. I'll give you some examples now of the ranked outcomes and the temporal evolution, and then go into the results of our precision judgments across the aggregation of these results. I won't talk about comparing to existing knowledge bases in this talk. So, for example, someone mentions gout. What are they likely to mention afterwards? The top-ranked issues were the phrases that people mentioned, or unigrams and bigrams that people mentioned, were basically people mentioning flare-ups, uric acid, uric more generally, I guess, and flare more generally, big toe, joints, aged, and then at the bottom you have bollock, and you have kind of people trying. So I'm not sure whether there's a specific UK kind of bias in this data. But most of these words you can see are related to gout, which is a disease where uric acid builds up in your body and causes pain in various joints. And for each of these, we can take a look at the lift. How much more likely are you to say this? So this is the absolute difference in likelihood of saying this. So if you were 1% likely to mention some, say, flare-up, now you'd be 5.1% likely, given that the difference is 4.1%. And then this is the z-score. So all of these results are pretty statistically significant. Another example, people who are trying to lose belly fat, they're more likely to talk about burning, ab workouts, and then they're more likely to mention videos and playlists and stuff like that afterwards as well. I'm just going through a couple of samples. If you have any questions about something specific, let me know. If you mention triglycerides, you're more likely to talk about your risk, or statin and lowering, I assume, blood pressure, cardiovascular issues, healthy diet, fatty acids, and things like this. If you mention that you have a pension or you're saving for retirement, then then there's a whole other taxes and retirements and budgets and stuff that start to come out of this. We can also, as I mentioned, start taking a look at the temporal evolution of these terms. So there's a couple I want to mention. So most things in general, most of our outcomes we saw roughly co-occurring with the mention of the target, so occurring on the same day. So this graph is the number of days before and after the treatment is the x-axis, and then y-axis is the expected number of tweets, and each of these graphs has a different scale for that, so I don't label the axis directly. But so let's see, there was one I wanted to find here. So yeah, so for example, which one was I going to go? Pain, yeah. So tramadol is a painkiller. And so people take it, they're mentioning pain, that's the red line, the treatment line is the people who took tramadol. And their pain goes up at the same day that they're talking about taking tramadol. And then After they take tramadol, the pain mentions go away, and then about a week later, they start talking about pain again. I don't understand tramadol well enough to know why. I don't know if the course of medication lasts a week or if this is commonly used for certain kinds of illnesses where pain recurs weekly. But this is the type of thing that we're seeing. And obviously, we'd like to go in with a domain expert and understand these better. We talk about, we see people mentioning Xanax and weed. So it's important to note that people take Xanax both medicinally and recreationally, apparently. And so you see people who are taking it recreationally then mentioning weed. We have started to do some work on trying to cluster these outcomes so we can understand, there's a certain class of outcomes that might occur for some people, maybe different outcomes occur for different people. But this is just, I hope, gives you an idea of the types of temporal patterns that we see.
What's the weird person?
Weird person, that's unfortunate. I think that's people who are using Prozac as basically slang to denigrate someone. So they're saying he's a weird person, or they're on, something like that. Yep.
I was just wondering, does negation factor into this a lot? Like we have weed, or we could have no weed, or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's a back and forth of bigrams or unigrams, or
yeah.
I mean, is that factored in?
No, we don't. And so that's one of the types of things that would be really great. So for example, we see in a lot of these anxiety drugs and stress-related stuff that people do something and their stress goes away, but then they're still saying, oh, I have no stress now, or my anxiety is much better, right? And so it's actually, this is simply just people mentioning the issue, and it could be that it's going away, but they're mentioning it more, or it's actually not going away and increasing. Yeah.
Just the mention of the event itself, whether it exists or not exists, doesn't matter. Just
correct. And it would be great. I mean, so that would be the type of thing that I would want to put into the initial generation of the timelines. When we're converting from the raw text into this representation of what people are experiencing, it'd be great to say that's not weed, right, instead of weed. Or maybe we could pick a different example, given. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. You understand. Great. Yes.
Can I ask one more question about the graphs? So these lines are tracking the outcome mentions?
Yes.
The boundary between gray and white is where the treatment mention is.
Correct. Yes. Sorry, I didn't explain that.
So it's a little surprising that we're not seeing more talk about weed early on, the people who are taking both Xanax and weed recreationally.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. It's possible that there's a temporal thing going on, that people, maybe there's some change happening between the February through April timeframe where, I don't know, maybe people are going to more outdoor raves or something like that as they get into spring. So it's quite possible we're seeing systematic artifacts like that.
And what was the timeline, like in the last couple of years? Or
what? March 2014 is the time when we looked for the target events. And then we grabbed a month before and a month after as well.
I was just wondering if, in that particular case, to some of the legal changes around the country have affected that?
Possible. It could be spring break. It could be, I don't know. There's all sorts of things that, yeah. So this is only 3 months. It'd be great to start applying this to really longitudinal data sets. And I would hope that would start to factor out some of these things. Yeah.
How confident are you that this data is representative of the larger population of people who don't freely share their stuff on Twitter?
I'm pretty confident it's not. but more seriously, so there are going to be some domains where people are more open and more open to discussing what's going on in their lives. There's also the possibility that there's a lot of domains where even if most people aren't talking about it, the ones who are having a representative experience. But bias is a big issue here, and we don't have a good handle on the bias that goes into generating these social media timelines. There are some things we understand. We know people are more likely to talk about extreme events, less likely to talk about everyday things that, I think the rule of thumb is, do you feel like your friends would think this is boring? If so, many fewer people are going to mention it. Mm-hmm. But no, we don't understand that bias very well. There's a couple of experiments that would be nice to get started to understand that better, but it's a really hard problem. Okay, evaluating correctness. So here, this is where I mentioned we took a look at mechanical Turk workers to judge the correctness of these results, and then we calculated based on that precision at rank, at a particular rank. I mentioned I'm not gonna go into the knowledge base thing here. So to help our judges understand whether something was correct or not, right? So someone mentions, say, the treatment is dealing with jealousy issues and the outcome is wake up. What we'll do is we'll show them an example tweet where someone is mentioning jealousy issues, and then we say later on the same user, so we find a tweet by the same user later on says, I need you to wake up because I'm bored. And now we'll give each Turker 2 to 3 of these pairs of messages. We'll then generate several sets of these paired messages for each of these treatment outcome pairs, and we'll get the Turker to say, is someone who's mentioning X dealing with jealousy issues later be more likely to talk about wake up, right? So here, I would have judged this one as wrong. And so I'd have to I should take a look and see what our workers said for this specific example. But then you can see others suffering from depression. If you think depression, okay. And then later on, self-harm is the outcome. This one, maybe. Paying credit card debts and then talking about apartments later. So someone has said they paid that credit card bill and then later they talk about checking for apartments. That one, maybe they are really more likely to talk about that, right? So this is the type of task we're giving to our mechanical Turkers. And in aggregate, what we found was that when we sort all of our outcomes by their rank, so the top 5 outcomes, top 5 to 10 outcomes, et cetera, we found that the highest rank outcomes had a precision close to 80%, where people were just judging this is relevant or not relevant. And then it drops from there. And we see basically correlated with where our both our average treatment effect, which is how this is ranked, as well as the statistical significance rank things. And it drops down to cumulatively about between 50 and 60%. Non-cumulatively, you're dropping into like the low 40s to high 30s down at this tail end in terms of the precision. We do see variance in precision across domains. So some domains are doing better than others. So some of the law is doing really well. Health is pretty consistent and doing just over around 65% or so precision. Financial services are deemed pretty good, and construction maintenance was our worst. A lot of this change in precision is actually due to data volume. So as we get, not all of our scenarios had the same numbers of users. As we saw more users in our data sets, the precision tended to increase. I'd be happy to talk about more things as we get to the end of the slide. I don't know how much time we have or if I've already gone over. So future directions, there's many missing capabilities in this system. We're looking at how can we start to reason about not just binary events or binary experiences, but also continuously valued events. Looking at frequency-based analyses and also just generally being more aware of time. So right now we ignore whether something happens immediately or whether it happens a week or 2 in the future, and that makes a difference in calculations. And we're also basically going to reintegrate some of the text parsing that we had done earlier into this analysis. I'm working with some distributed systems researchers to build out a system that's capable of doing this analysis at scale. Right now, these 39, 40 scenarios I mentioned were done by pulling basically a copy of the Twitter data and for that particular scenario and running things offline. And we'd like to be able to do that much faster and at large scale. With several really great collaborators, we're looking at domain-specific analyses for not just individual level questions, but also some policy issues. What are people's experiences with, say, bullying or with depression and things like that? And I'm also looking at application ideas. How can you start to use this data to provide a nice backing for other analyses or other kind of interfaces? To conclude, we focused here on demonstrating how stratified propensity score analysis can be applied to personal experiences to extract out outcomes of specific situations. We applied this to a diverse set of domains and evaluated how well the outcomes looked to mechanical Turk judges. And yeah, that's it. I'd love to talk to you more about this work and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
One thing Twitter can give you, at least in some cases, is location. And I'm wondering if you're considered whether some of these outcomes might differ by region or by country, and if you've looked into that.
No. So exact location, we only have for 1 or 2% of tweets. But you're right that we can identify kind of larger regions, like what city or what state or country people are in, for about 60 to 70% of tweets. We haven't incorporated that as a feature in our analysis, at least not explicitly. So if people imply their location through their text, that might be getting captured here somehow in the analysis of the text, but we're not taking it into account in any other way. But that you also raise another kind of broader point, which is that the outcomes are likely to vary by individual, and we do see traces of that. So we looking at even just our stratified outcomes, we do have examples where, let's see if I can pull one up. Let's see. So this is from a different analysis. We do have examples where, for example, this is the likelihood of people to perform suicide ideation based on analysis of not Twitter data, but Reddit data. And we see that if people mention the word depression, their likelihood of later performing suicide ideation, talking about suicide, goes up. And how much it goes up depends on their likelihood of talking about, their likelihood of mentioning the word depression. So as the propensity goes up, if they're not likely to talk about depression, then if they do, their likelihood of performing suicide ideation goes way up. If they are very likely to talk about depression, actually using the word depression doesn't seem to make a difference. That's one example. Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, in the realm of other data that Twitter gives you, that occurs to me too, could be interesting to look at the network effects. If someone has a high percentage of @ mentions with another user that did mention suicide, are they more likely to take on mentions of depression or vice versa?
Yeah, I don't know very much about how the corrections you have to do for the math and the analysis for analyzing network effects of treatments. But yes, I mean, there's all sorts of interesting interactions, a lot of interesting things that you can treat as being a action that you want to analyze the outcome of. Yeah, and how you get that into the timeline, you could, there's also sorts of ways you can do that. Yes?
A couple of questions on the crowdsourcing. You selected the top 3 outcomes that you had judged by the crowdsourcing judges?
Oh, so for every scenario that we analyzed, that we had run our analysis for, we selected the top 60 scenarios, 60 outcomes. And then for each of those outcomes, we gave every mechanical Turk worker, we gave each judge at least 2 paired messages. So a treatment outcome, and then user 2 says treatment outcome. And then, assuming we had enough data, we would then also repeat that with a different pair of treatment outcomes 3 times.
And then how many judges did you have for each set?
I believe we had 3, but I'd have to check.
So it would be interesting to see whether, if you exploded that out into 10 or 20, what the distribution of that would be, because it seems like it might be very subjective whether wake up is associated with, I forget what the control was.
That's true. With jealousy.
Jealousy and wake up and smell the coffee. He's not that into you.
Yeah.
Yes, but not wake up in this particular instance. The context might affect the judgment, and there might actually be interesting distributions of what people think would be more likely to be mentioned, given the.
You're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Could you go to the slide after this?
Before or
After. The one with the graphs?
oh the stratified results or this?
No, the one with the blue and orange. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I skipped around. So
Can you explain the last one with the cat?
so this was this is results from a different analysis. It happened to be in the slide deck. Here, so in the presentation, I talked about an effects of cause analysis. So something, an effects of cause analysis where something happens and we look at the effects afterwards. Here we were actually doing a causes of an effect analysis. So we were looking for what happened that increased the likelihood of one event. So we iterated over all the, so before I said we picked, looked at the outcomes Y, here we're actually looking at the precursors X and iterating over those. And so here, all of these graphs are showing the likelihood for people to post in a suicide ideation forum. This is joint work with some collaborators at Munmunda Choduri at Georgia Tech. And we're looking at basically the words that seem to increase the likelihood of people doing this. Yeah.
And I was wondering if it would also make sense to see if after a given event, you could actually cluster people into different groups that sort of react or talk differently about that event, right? So imagine, a bunch of people mentioned taking drug X, right? And many of them may experience the expected effects, and then a small group there, but consistently may experience adverse effects, right? Mm-hmm. So by doing that split, you could actually sort of determine different outcomes and different groups of people that experience things differently.
Yeah.
So another thing is, I think in psychology, right? I mean, that will be it will be important because people's perception of the world or of events, is very important for their psychological state. So if a certain event happens, some people might just move on very easily, whereas others, tend to be very affected by it.
So we've done some very basic things to look into that. What we've done is we've started clustering the outcomes based on the user IDs, whoever mentioned them. And that does give us a split that, say, takes the recreational drug users' outcomes and separates them from the medicinal drug users' outcomes. There's that type of thing. Now, more generally, there are methods in the econometrics literature on how to calculate heterogeneous treatment effects, where you more directly look at what prior features seem to be important when actually calculating the effect of the treatment. We haven't done that yet. Yeah. Yeah.
I just a comment that I think Twitter's a really interesting source, but it might be real interesting as well to run this over medical data like patient discharge records. Yeah. That are very fact-based, that talk about what state the patient is in and subsequent outcomes, and that might be very, I think because that type of English is typically just all about facts. Where on Twitter, it seems like there might be some more noise interjected into it.
I agree with you. That'd be pretty cool. Yes.
Wait, you were mentioning that you classify the data on the ID. So some metadata that you got from the tweeters, but sometimes the metadata in Twitter is very poor, very bad maintained. So what did you really use as a metadata for classification?
Which classification? You mean the
divided by ID?
Sorry. Yeah, I did not mean to mention that. I didn't mean to imply what I think I must have said. No, so I'm looking for the slide where I think that might have come across. Oh, well, okay. So what we did was What we did was we did not look at any of the metadata from Twitter. We only looked at the language. I did at one point, I couldn't find the slide just now. We aggregated by user ID, but we did not otherwise do anything else. So the fact that the user might have, have a particular homepage or have a certain number of followers or say their location is somewhere or implied gender by their name was not taken into account. Yes.
More on the crowdsourcing. That's really interesting. I'm wondering if you put any of the pairs that you ranked low before the Turkers.
We didn't.
To see how they rank those as a control, because
right.
I mean some of what you're getting at is interesting, implicit data that people may not have intuitions about.
Yeah. Pulling this up. So this is the cumulative figure, right? But in the non-cumulative, I said that at these lower ranks, the just looking at these last results and stuff, you're around the 35 to 40% precision range. I would, having looked at what gets ranked down, like at the 50th result for a specific scenario, I treat that as a control. Those start to look pretty bad.
3 judges, you had 2 out of 3 and 3 out of 3 were yeses?
Actually, we averaged. So we asked them actually on I believe it was a 4-point scale. We said that it's either not relevant at all was a 0, and then very completely relevant was a 1, and then we had probably relevant, probably not relevant.
You have 3 users, and you average the score for the users and their score. Okay.
Yes, and then we have, across our 39 experiments, we have 5 top 5 scenarios for those 39, and then that's what makes up this distribution in this box right here.
Any internet annotator agreement figures that you had on that?
Not off the top of my head. Sorry. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I remember you have slides that talk about the control group. So it seems that now for control group, you use everyone who's not having the treatment. Have you tried to look at control group that look like the people who you have the treatment but without the treatment?
So coming back to here, when we do this stratified analysis, if people look like the treatment, then what will happen is that we won't do a good job separating the treatment from the control population when we do the stratification, and you'll get a lot of common support. A lot of these strata will have enough people on both sides to do a good statistical comparison. If we do a poor job selecting the control users and they separate easily, so it's very easy to tell someone who's going to take Xanax versus someone who's not. Say we have some systematic issue with the sampling, for example. Then what will happen is that all of these green dots will come up to the high strata, and all the red dots will be pushed down to the low strata, and then we won't actually have any comparison here. So when we have a control group that's partially comparable and partially not, what happens is the control group goes way down to the bottom. It's very easy to separate them out. And then we have some support in the middle where people are similar.
Concern is that maybe the people in the control group are so different from people who are in the treatment.
Yeah.
So therefore, the difference is not only about whether they have treatment or not, but about a lot of other stuff, like the confounding factors you mentioned.
So when they are very different, then they get put in, all the control group will get put into a very low strata because it's very easy to predict that they're not going to take the treatment. And then there's no one left in the treatment group to compare them against. So we don't get statistical significance in that strata, and we can tell that those people shouldn't be included in our comparison. So that's something you bring up an important detail. When we calculate the average treatment effect, we only calculate it over the region of common support, where we have enough control and treatment users in the strata to give us a good result. If we don't get that common support, then we basically end up essentially ignoring the users, both treatment and control, who are in a strata that doesn't have enough of the opposite person. Great. Thank you very much.